our wonderful friend Tony Blinken has joined us a few minutes ago. Tony, hello to you. Thank you so much for joining us on a beautiful Saturday early afternoon here in Washington, D.C. With us are over 30 Muslim American elected officials and a few of our board members that I see with us here. These are elected officials who range in terms of their positions from local city council positions to state elected officials. We just had Keith with us, who has served in Congress, obviously has a very, very important role in this moment of our nation's history in Minnesota as the Attorney General there. For everyone, as I mentioned earlier, Tony Blinken is a consummate public official, diplomat, and really as I used to be, really a civil servant in the sense of he has dedicated his life to serving our country and its people. His most senior recent positions were as Undersecretary of the State Department, where I served. And before that, he was Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama. He is currently one of the top advisors to Joe Biden for president, and we're really thrilled to have him here with us today. The format today will be as follows. We are going to ask Mr. Blinken to say a few words and remarks regarding why should the Muslim American community, with its elected officials, support Joe Biden in this moment of history. And then I will open it up for questions. Let us just simply raise our hands when we have questions, and I'll call upon you. Let's not use the chat box because it will overwhelm you here. But let's have this honest, frank, constructive discussion, because all of us are, as I tell my own team at Emgage, in this boat together. And we have no one but each other here to make sure that it's still moving and that we still remain afloat and get to where we need to as a nation, as a nation that's constantly evolving and improving. So with that, Tony, I'm gonna turn it over to you and let you address our audience.
Well, thank you so much. It's always great to be with you. And as I like to say, we've done a few of these things together. And we're used to seeing each other on a screen because we spent a lot of time in the White House Situation Room, and while I was broadcasting in from New York, from our UN mission there. So this is kind of like old home week every time we get a chance to do this. But I really welcome the opportunity to see you and especially the leadership that you continue to exert. And Karim, I heard before, very good to be back with you. I really want to thank Emgage for bringing us together today and just giving me an opportunity to speak with Muslim elected officials from across the country. I also heard Attorney General Ellison. It's obviously not a good thing to follow him anytime you're speaking, but you can see why his voice, his leadership in the quest for justice in Minnesota and across the country is so important, and really gratified to have him and his leadership engaged in this effort. Particularly pleased that Emgage, the PAC, endorsed Joe Biden in our campaign. I wanted to recognize a few folks at the outset who I know are with us today. State Senator Ghazala Hashimi from Virginia, where I'm speaking from. State Senator Sharif Street from Pennsylvania. State Rep. Abdullah Hammoud from Michigan. City Councilman Bashir Jones from Cleveland, Ohio. And let me just say at the outset, look, I know these are incredibly anxious times on so many different fronts for folks, whether it's health, whether it's the economy, whether it is this usually and fundamentally important conversation that we're now finally engaged in about racial justice and equity in this country. You know, we're living these moments. It's incredibly challenging, but I think the Vice President will tell you that we have to have, even as we're engaged in it, some sense of hope and optimism, because the fact of the matter is we have pulled together time and again in our history to overcome crisis, to overcome division, to overcome strife. And we have the expertise, we have the will, we have the spirit to defeat some of the challenges that we're facing now, as hard, as difficult, and as fundamental as they are. But if we're going to succeed, we need everyone engaged, and we need Muslim American voices, Muslim American leadership to be part of the solution. And so that's why I'm particularly pleased to be able to talk to all of you today. You know, in the past few weeks, while President Trump has been hunkered down in his White House bunker, the Vice President has been outspoken in addressing the systemic racism and inequity that still infect large parts of our society. I think some of you probably heard a lot of what he's had to say and what he's done over the last couple of weeks. He addressed so much of the national anguish and anger over the killing of George Floyd. He's met with community leaders at a historically Black church in Wilmington. He hosted a roundtable with mayors. He held a town hall with young Americans. He wrote in the LA Times detailing the urgent steps he believes we should take to tackle systemic racism and inequity. Mostly, I think what we've seen, and this is what's been so stark, is there is a palpable desire across the country, we're hearing it, for leadership in these difficult times. The president is certainly not providing it, and to the extent he leads, it's always in the wrong direction. The Vice President Biden, on the other hand, has shown the empathy, but also the resoluteness and the determination to try to heal some of these wounds, not, as President Trump would do, actually pour salt on them. To protect our democracy in this hour of need, to strengthen it, to make it better, not to preen and make things worse. So I think you've heard him talk at length about why so many people are peacefully protesting, and the why is what's so important, as well as what leaders should be doing to try to start righting these longstanding wrongs, but to act now. He's called on Congress to pass urgent legislation that would actually give true meaning to the constitutional right of equal protection under law. And he's pledged to fight the deadly health and economic inequities that this COVID crisis has actually revealed in incredibly stark ways, and that all of you know so well. As president, he would invest in communities of color. He would work to make healthcare a universal right, a right, by the way, that every single day the Trump administration is trying to gut with its ceaseless attacks on Obamacare. He'd work to make sure that we protect and pay all workers fairly for all that they do to carry this nation forward, and to literally carry us, in a sense, on their backs every single day. Mostly, I think what you see with Joe Biden is someone who wants to try to bring this country together, because he is convinced that when we are together, when we work together, when we act together, there is nothing we can't overcome. That's the antithesis of President Trump, who has used the vast power of his office to divide us, to pit American against American. Joe Biden, on the other hand, has shown the kind of steady moral leadership that I believe our country needs to try to turn its righteous anger and anguish into purpose to together build a more just and equitable future. As A.G. Ellison said, it is about voting, but then it's about more than voting. It's about acting once, hopefully, we have the ability to do so. Let me just say a word before we open this up for conversation about the engagement that our campaign has had with Muslim American communities. We've made it a priority. The Vice President deeply respects the contributions the diverse communities of Muslim Americans make every single day to our country. Small business owners, healthcare providers, scientists, teachers, retail workers, so many other fields. We appointed a senior advisor for Muslim engagement, Farouk Mita, who I'm sure all of you know, or if you don't, you will, to focus on this important work, but to really listen to your ideas, to engage in substantive policy discussions. I've had the opportunity to join several of those myself, and to engage internally at the highest levels of the campaign. And so, look, I don't think I need to rehearse the importance of this election. We always say, you know, before every election cycle, most important election of our lifetimes. This one actually is. And as Joe Biden has said, the soul of our nation is on the ballot. And the character of the president matters deeply. You've experienced as a community, as communities, firsthand, the damage of Donald Trump's presidency, from the Muslim ban to vicious attacks and discrimination, increased bullying. I think Joe Biden could not be more clear. It's just not who we are. And this battle for the soul of the nation is real. Our core values, everything that makes America America, is at stake. And let me just say in closing, remind you of some of the commitments that Joe Biden has made to fighting for many of the things that I think matter most to Muslim Americans across the sweep of our country. Standing steadfastly against insidious and un-American actions like the Muslim ban. Honoring Muslim American communities and their many contributions to our country. Strengthening Obamacare to ensure that every American has access to affordable, quality health care. Tackling the student debt crisis. Offering 4 years of free public college for families making less than $125,000 a year. Forgiving student loans for any public college graduate earning under that same amount. Investing $1.7 trillion in building a clean energy economy, fighting climate change. Finally, putting the justice in our criminal justice system. Safeguarding faith communities and houses of worship with very practical steps. We launched a plan just a few weeks ago to do that. Restoring human rights and democracy as the center of our engagement with the world, something I'm happy to talk about more. But here's the bottom line. The snapshot of this election right now is positive, but snapshots are only that. They're a moment in time. And it's the moving picture that counts. And how this last reel of the movie unfolds between now and November is vital. I know this. President Trump's not just going to throw the kitchen sink at us. He's going to throw the kitchen and the entire house at us. And so we need everyone's support. We need everyone's engagement. We need everyone's vote. And we know the strength of the Muslim American community, especially in a number of critical states that will decide this election. And what I so appreciate and admire is, look, it's easy to get cynical. But instead of that, over the last 4 years, rather than getting discouraged, rather than getting disengaged, you've built strong institutions like Emgage. You've run and elected candidates from across the country. Witness to that, pretty much everyone on this video today. And you've uplifted the voices of marginalized citizens in your communities. So today is powerful evidence of what we can actually accomplish when we engage, when you engage at every single level, local, state, federal, across the country. And let me say this and commit to this in closing. When Joe Biden is president of the United States, the doors of the White House will reopen as a home for all Americans, and a Biden administration will not just invite Muslim Americans into the White House for an occasional meal or iftar. They will be part of the administration. These voices, your voices, the diversity of voices that make up our country will actually be part of the administration and making policy. So let me just close by thanking every single one of you for the vital work you're doing as public officials every single day to try to move our country forward and hopefully to bring change this November.
Thank you so much, Tony. Those words cannot be more true, given all that is happening and what we have seen the last few years as a first-generation immigrant to this country. And not presuming that America was perfect when we arrived in San Jose, California in 1988. Far from it. But I can't say that things have gone for the better on so many key issues the last 4 years. And it's all about leadership. Many of the issues that Trump is dealing with, he inherited. Discrimination, systemic discrimination against Black Americans didn't begin with Trump, but how he has handled it. COVID. These are issues that are bigger than all of us. But again, how he has managed it, and he has divided rather than unified the country, that's been so worrying. And in the process, further our divide from the rest of the world. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up for questions. What I do ask is that first, the speaker introduce themselves, where you are from, what position you hold, and then keep your questions to questions. So to give an opportunity to Tony to answer them, and so we can get as many of you an opportunity to ask those questions. So I will begin with Mayor Mohammed Khairullah to ask the first question. Please go ahead, unmute yourself and go for it.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, Tony, thank you very much. And thank you, Wael, for organizing this. I have two quick questions. I am a mayor in Prospect Park, New Jersey, currently serving my 18th year as an elected official in the state of New Jersey. So my two questions, number one, what are we doing as a party to make sure that the Sanders voters are joining us in November, because that is critical to defeating Trump? The second question is on foreign policy, because as a Syrian American, when I speak in support of Biden, they're going to ask me about this. And that is, unfortunately, until to this day, Iran has been allowed to work inside Syria, support Assad. What is the Biden administration going to do about the curbing the influence of Iran, which is propping up Assad against the will of the people to become free?
Great.
Thank you very much.
I did not plant that question, I promise. I really
Mr. Mayor, thank you, and thank you for your leadership for so many years. It's really a pleasure to be with you. A couple of things in response. I think you heard Senator Sanders say just the other day what a good relationship he has with Vice President Biden. They worked together for many years and very well in the United States Senate. They're friends, and that starting at that level, that's made a big difference. The grace with which Senator Sanders left the race and then endorsed the vice president was quite remarkable. And since then, we have brought together from the Sanders campaign and also from Elizabeth Warren's campaign some very prominent leaders to work with members of our campaign on a whole series of issues to make sure that we were developing the most effective policy possible. And so we've had these roundtable discussions that have gone on now for well over a month. And I've got to tell you that when you look at the platform Joe Biden will bring to the election in November, it is no questions asked the most progressive platform of any Democratic nominee in the history of our party. And maybe you can say that in the context of his time, FDR had the most progressive platform, but certainly this is the most progressive platform, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's climate, whether it's criminal justice, you name it, of any nominee in our party's history. On the foreign policy level alone, we've been also very engaged with a number of progressive groups. We have an ongoing dialogue and conversation to make sure that issues that they care about are reflected in our thinking. And that's not something that will stop on election day. As I said, we want to make sure that the diversity of voices that reflects our party and, more important, reflects our country is also reflected in a Biden administration. So I think we're off to a pretty good start on that, and it's something that we're deeply committed to. On Syria, look, I couldn't agree more. And Wael and I've had this conversation. I've talked to some other colleagues about this. Look, I've got to start by saying that as someone who was in a policy role in the Obama administration, I have to recognize the fact that, not for want of trying, we failed when it comes to Syria, and we were not able to prevent the horrific loss of life that we've seen over the last years. We could not prevent the huge number of internally displaced and those made refugees in other countries. And it's something that, I have to take with me and will carry with me, I think, for the rest of my days. As I say, honestly, it wasn't for want of trying, but the results were clearly not there. President Trump took a bad situation and made it a lot worse. I think that his almost schizophrenic actions in Syria have been sending the wrong messages to all the wrong people. For example, he tweeted without any consultation or any coordination his intent to pull out entirely of Syria with the remaining forces, mostly special operators, that we had there. And then when our military slow walked that, he then abandoned the Syrian Democratic Forces, who played a major role, a lead role, in helping us defeat Daesh and taking back Raqqa at great cost and great sacrifice. And that left a gap, a hole, into which Russia, Iran, and the Assad regime have been able to fill what was left of Syria. They now have further dominion over it. We had to abandon our own bases to Russians and Syrians. I think that we still have real, although I don't want to exaggerate it, but we still have some real potential leverage to do a few things to make sure that, as best possible, we prevent further slaughter, particularly in Idlib, that we insist that there be a transition in Syria that reflects the will of the population, and that we make sure that humanitarian assistance is able to flow more effectively into the country. And that leverage is this. We still have a small number of remaining special operators and their support teams in Syria. They happen to be located near where very valuable oil resources are in the northeast, something the regime values tremendously. I would make sure that we leverage that presence to make sure that we could get some progress on these other issues that I mentioned. Similarly, the United States has more ability than any country on earth to mobilize the international community to help at the right time rebuild Syria. But I would make sure that we didn't exercise that influence and use that ability unless we leveraged it, again, against things like the protection of Idlib, like a political transition, and like humanitarian assistance. So again, I don't want to overstate it because what influence we've had has been so diminished, but it's still there. And I could tell you that instead of being absent without leave, we're not involved almost at all in any of what's left of the diplomacy surrounding Syria. We would show up. We would be engaged. We would work it every single day. And I hope we could take what is a pretty awful situation, at least make it a little bit better.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just hope that you guys consider consulting with the Syrian American organizations that are in Washington, D.C. I might disagree with you on Syrian Democratic Forces because these are ethnically created forces, do not represent the entire population of Syria. I think you need to hear from a diverse group of Syrians, not create Kurdish forces, because Syria is multi-ethnic and the forces representing freedom should be multi-ethnic as well. So the fact that the administration in the past depended on an ethnic force, that did not get the support of the populist Syrians, number one. Number two, our biggest concern is any new deal with Iran would allow for its influence to expand again in Syria. So whether we want to create a nuclear deal or not, or reestablish the nuclear deal, Iran's hand in Syria should be curbed. They should have absolutely no influence in return of a nuclear deal.
Thank you, Mayor.
Let me just say, while I really appreciate both points, and I want to assure you, I've had the opportunity to speak to a pretty broad coalition of Syrian Americans representing, again, a diversity of views, and we have what I hope is an ongoing dialogue that, again, would continue into a Biden administration, not stop if we're elected. And certainly, I know the diversity of views on this, and certainly the diversity of the country including very different perspectives on the Syrian Democratic Forces. So I appreciate that. And on Iran, let me just say very, very quickly, since you raised it. Look, by any measure, President Trump's policy has been an abject failure in moving away and tearing up the Iran nuclear agreement. He said that the Iranians would come back to the table to negotiate a so-called better agreement. And then he said by exerting maximum pressure on Iran, it would curb their malicious activities in the region. And we've seen exactly the opposite. Iran is now, because it's restarted some of the most dangerous aspects of its nuclear program that the deal that we negotiated stopped, because it's restarted that, it is now closer to having the capacity to build a nuclear weapon than it was when we left office. And President Trump has no plan, no strategy to stop it from advancing much further and getting to the point where it could break out and build, create the fissile material for a weapon on such short notice that we couldn't really do much about it. So that's an abject failure. And second, this, again, almost schizophrenic approach that Trump has taken, President Trump has taken to Iran, at first not reacting to any of its successes, including some of the attacks it made in the region, feeding a sense of impunity, and then reacting, I think, incredibly recklessly and creating a spiral of actions that almost led us to war. That has certainly produced a more dangerous region and one that has not been hospitable to our own interests. If the Iranians come back into compliance with their obligations under the nuclear agreement, Joe Biden believes we should do the same and then work with our allies and partners to strengthen and lengthen it. But the benefit of that would also be that our partners who believe very strongly in sticking with the deal have been spending all of their time and energy trying to work around our opposition to it and work around our foreign policy instead of focusing on Iran and dealing with the actions it takes that we don't like. If we're once again united and working from the same perspective, we're going to be much more effective in actually working together to curb Iranian actions that we don't like, including in Syria. So sorry for going on, but since you raised it, I wanted to address it.
Thank you, Tony. And for everyone, we're going to try to get a few questions from elected officials that I'm going to prioritize here. We'll try to get as many of you as we can. Okay, Judge Rabia Collier from Texas, go ahead.
Hi, I'm a Texas state judge in Harris County, which is Houston, for those that may not be familiar. Down here in 2018, we had some very inspiring victories. And we did that in part because each candidate, we have a very long ballot down here, each candidate pushed their particular community to the voting booth. With that said, how specifically can we as Muslim elected officials help Joe Biden win in the various capacities in which we can do that?
Look, thank you, Judge, and thank you for the work that you're doing every day. I think in various ways, judges will be at the front lines of this election because I anticipate there's going to be a lot of litigation about different aspects of this. I guess I hope it doesn't necessarily affect you because it'll be contentious. But look, one of the things that's so important is that everyone on this call has a remarkable network. By dint of who you are, what you're doing, the support that you've already gotten since I think virtually all of you were elected, and exercising those networks, communicating with them, encouraging them. I think the case that Attorney General Ellison made was incredibly compelling, energizing them, and fighting, pushing back against any complacency or the thought that, it doesn't matter and there really isn't a difference. My God, if there's not a difference this time, I don't know when there ever has been or when there ever will be. So I think exercising those networks, first and foremost, is usually important. We have a lot of things that we're doing on the campaign to channel energy, to channel ideas, to channel engagement in different ways, whether it's getting out the vote, whether it's informing people, whether it's organizing people. And so I know we'd be happy to follow up and just make sure that you know what some of those resources are so that you can share them with folks, in your network and in your community. And, while we'll have to make sure we figure out a way to do that if we haven't already done it. But we've got usually active efforts on organization, on turnout, on engagement, on information, and so forth. So we can make sure that folks are plugged into each and every one of those. And in a way, it's even more critical this time, just by the nature of, unfortunately, of the campaign that we have to run, a very virtual campaign, not, knocking on doors face to face in ways that we have in the past. I hope we were able to get back to that. But meanwhile, we're working very hard to figure out how to make this virtual campaign as effective as possible.
Thank you, Tony. I'm going to call on Lisa Zargarpur.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, very good. So I was elected to my local school board in my area. I am also a teacher in a different district. So here's my first question is the Biden campaign looking at a broad spectrum of people to fill positions in like the cabinet or other appointments who represent what the U.S. actually looks like? And then is the campaign actually paying attention to how like normal people talk about these potential appointments? I can give you an earful from the teacher perspective if you ever want to know, but I'm just curious because there's a big push where I live in Prince William County. We finally have a board of county supervisors that looks a little more like our majority minority population. My particular district votes locally a little more red, so my win was a really tough one. And I have a friend who was appointed as a Secretary of Education here in Virginia, first Muslim to be appointed to a position like that. And he reminded all of us in an elected position that it's one thing to lift up voices, but it's another thing to make policies. So sometimes, and make those changes from our seats now. So I know that's kind of all loaded here, but specifically, what is the Biden campaign doing to look at that spectrum of people to fill these positions?
Yeah, Lisa, thank you very much for that question, and it does go to the heart, not just of what we're thinking, but of what we're doing. Let me give you, and let me say two things. First, the simple answer to your first question is yes. Joe Biden is determined to build an administration that actually looks like the country. And I think, I know that if elected, you will see that in the most senior appointments he makes, all the way through the administration. And we've tried to get a head start on that. And I can just talk to you about the area that I'm responsible for, which is foreign policy. We established at the start of the campaign what a lot of campaigns do, which are basically working groups in all the different foreign policy areas, covering all of the key countries and regions and all of the issues that you normally cover in foreign policy or national security, democracy and human rights and arms control and non-proliferation and so forth. But one of the things that I think is unique that we did is we also established a working group on diversity in national security. And we've sought from day one of this campaign to make sure that we had ways to identify and build out a national security part of the administration that again reflects the diversity of the country and looks like the country. This has been a problem, a perennial problem, especially in foreign policy. Minorities are underrepresented significantly in this area. There are lots of reasons for that, and there's systemic challenges that we're also trying to cope with. But if you don't affirmatively and proactively and aggressively try to tackle that, you're never going to solve it. So I'm really proud of the work we've done. I'll give right now. We're not quite there, but almost half of the almost 1,400 people who are working in our foreign policy working groups are women. We have significant representation from virtually every minority community in the working groups, and we're working to make it better. But mostly we're working to make sure that we have ways of dealing with pipeline challenges, ways of identifying talent, and then mechanisms to bring people in when there is a Biden administration. So that's a commitment that starts with the vice president, but it's not just a commitment, it's something we're actively working on right now.
Okay, I see Brother Sharif Street raising his hand. And by the way, guys, my raised hands are moving all over the place. I'm trying to figure out what's going on, but I see Sharif Street raising his hand. Let's go to you, Brother Sharif, and then I'll get back to the queue.
No, wanted to thank you all for putting this together. I think it's great that Muslim leaders from around the country can both talk and hear what others are thinking about. I'm a state senator in Pennsylvania and vice chair of our state party. One of the things that I recognize is that Muslims are a fairly diverse group in and of themselves. We in Pennsylvania have a huge portion of Muslim Americans who are African American, whose families have been here probably for hundreds of years, who converted in the last couple generations. We have Muslims from South Asia, Muslims from the Middle East, and Muslims from West Africa. And so with probably close to around 500,000 Muslims living in the greater Philadelphia area, but they're extremely diverse. I'm just wondering what thought to making sure when we do groups and panels and discussions and talk about issues of Muslim Americans, has the campaign given to recognizing the diversity that is within American Muslim community?
Yeah, Senator, it's a great point, and one that's really worth foot stomping. And I think, you know, we've tried to do that in our own engagement, and Farouk, I don't know if Farouk is actually on the call. This is one of the,
he is.
And maybe even wants to address, but it's something that we have focused on. We've tried to make sure that we are engaging with the diversity in the community itself, different views, different issues that people care most passionately about. Again, I think in any Biden administration, we would want to reflect that diversity as well, the diversity within the diversity, if you will. But it is something that that we're conscious of, that I think we're focused on. I don't know, Farouk, if you want to say a word about that.
Farouk, go ahead if you're able to.
Or maybe you're muted.
He probably is. Let me see. Here he is. And unmute. Oh,
hey, Tony. Well,
hey.
Thanks. Senator Street, thanks. Yeah, definitely. That is one of my top priorities, and making sure that even my own kitchen cabinet of advisors is reflected. The diversity of the community is reflected. We did an Eid call with Dr. Biden where we included diverse voices, including female voices. We had Sister Camila Rashad on who's on that call from Philadelphia. So it's a big priority of mine and the campaigns. And I would love to connect with you offline on what more we could be doing as well.
Okay, thank you, Farouk. Let's try to do something here so we can be respectful of Tony's time. We have Brian Musallam, we have Abrar Ramesh, and Afshin Shamsi, who have been waiting patiently. I want you guys to ask your questions quickly together, Tony, see if you could keep track of this.
Okay.
And then I'm going to finish with one more question, just because that's all the time we have. How does that sound? So
Good.
Let's go ahead with Brian, Afshin, and Abrar, and then I'll go to Tony, and then I have one more question. So go ahead, Brian.
How you doing, Tony? Thank you for joining us. My name is Brian Musallam. I am a statewide elected trustee at Michigan State University. I'm actually on the Biden ticket this year in Michigan, and I wear multiple hats. One is as a Democrat, but obviously as a Muslim as well. Couple questions for you is, can we get a commitment that Muslims will be represented in senior posts when Joe Biden wins, number one? And number two, as you know, Michigan, there's not many models out there that have Joe Biden winning without winning Michigan.
Right.
My understanding, there's not many people on the ground here in Michigan, and we have two very prominent Muslim electeds in this state. One being Rashida Tlaib, and the other being Abdul Al-Sayed, who are on the progressive side. What are we doing to pull them in to make sure that Biden carries Michigan and make Michigan a blue state? Sorry, I know that was long. My apologies.
Thank you. That was a very good question. And the election of Rashida Tlaib, again, is very important to the community. It's
Very
going to mobilize them. Very important. Okay. Afshin, go ahead.
this forum. My name is Afshin Shamsi. I am on the Princeton Municipal Committee, former school board member in Princeton also. I'm co-chair of the South Asian American Caucus for the New Jersey Democratic State Committee. And I also serve on the board of the ACLU New Jersey. That's a little bit about myself, but I wanted to ask you, I see many parallels between what's happening in India and what's happening in America, between the leadership in both places. And for me, there really is no distinguishing factor between Trump and Modi. And so I know, everyone has come out on the Democratic side in strong condemnation of Trump, but I don't see that as strongly reflected in the condemnation of Modi. And I think that's a particular concern because there are 90 million Muslims in India, and then there are several several 100,000 Indian Muslims who reside in America, and so with families back home that they're concerned about, and so that's of significant concern. And then the second thing I would say is that I hope that under President Biden that we'll finally have a humane immigration system. I know that Trump has really abused the system, but really the infrastructure for that system was set up by prior administrations. And I really think that our immigration system needs to be completely rehauled because the way that we have treated the injustices against these migrant families are just very grave, and we need to look at it close and ensure that this doesn't happen again in our country.
Thank you.
Okay, and Abrar, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for everyone who put this together, and Tony, for your time. I represent 1.1 million constituents here in Northern Virginia, and currently I'm a PLEO for Virginia for the DNC convention.
Great.
I did have, two questions, but one of them actually was addressed. So just specific policies and concrete pledges that the community can expect as we try to motivate folks, because I think I want to make sure that the support is earned authentically, so that folks have that buy-in and then long-term are engaged and not disappointed. So that's the first thing. The second is, I respectfully, I think, Tony, really appreciating your time, but being mindful of whether Muslim outreach is being housed under foreign policy. I think this is something that I just had some questions about. If you can clarify kindly for us, I think the Muslim community, certainly folks who have ties to countries abroad have questions about their homeland or that kind of thing. And that's not to be belittled, but I also am mindful of the fact that this is obviously a constituency of folks who are interested in a variety of issues, who are Americans, and many of them are American and have that in front of center. And I'd love to see that the community be regarded and handled in that sense. So when we think of policies, whether it's things like surveillance discrimination, there's so many things that are directly American about the interests of the community, and then in terms of appointments and whatnot, would love to hear some specificity on the promises that have been made. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Wael, do you want me to go ahead, or do you want to throw in your final?
You got plenty to chew on. I know you're talented, but that's quite a bit. So go for it.
So look, a few things. First of all, just on the last question, which is really important. I'd actually hoped that one of my colleagues who actually has forgotten more about domestic policy than I'll ever know could have joined us today, but she was not able to. But I know, and I can certainly commit that going forward, the prism through which we're engaging the communities is not through a foreign policy prism. I was determined to be with all of you today, and I just hope that we had someone from the domestic policy side of the house. I'm a pale substitute, but trying my best to reflect the various things that the campaign is working on, including in domestic policy and issues that are concerns to really all Americans, but obviously to Muslim Americans as well. So I know going forward we will do even more of that, and that's something that Farouk is working on. Look, what I can tell you about sitting here today about a Biden administration is this: there is an absolute commitment from Joe Biden to make sure that his administration, from the most senior levels on down, reflects the diversity of our country and includes in policy-making roles Muslim Americans as well as Americans from other diverse minority communities. I can't give you numbers. I'm certainly not going to talk about quotas, nothing like that. I can just give you that commitment, and then you'll have to judge us on it. But that's why, as I mentioned earlier, this is something we just don't pay lip service to. We're actually acting on, and I can just speaking for my area of foreign policy, national security, international policy. As I said, we literally from day one of the campaign stood up a working group that's incredibly active to build diversity in national security, and that, of course, includes Muslim American voices. And let me just underscore and repeat, it won't simply be that in a Biden administration, our administration would have conversations like this one with representatives of the community. Yes, that will certainly happen, and it will certainly continue and hopefully deepen. And as I said, the doors of the White House will once again be open. But that's not enough. As you've said, and as we agree, those views, those voices, those people need to be in the administration itself, and not just doing outreach, actually making policy. And so, as a matter of principle, I can absolutely commit to that, but I can't give you numbers. That's not what we're about. So judge us on our ability to deliver on that, but know that there is that commitment. I fully agree, obviously, on the centrality of Michigan to success in the election. It is obviously in the must-win category. As I mentioned earlier, we have significant engagement with progressive groups, progressive leaders across the spectrum. I can't speak directly to what we're doing in Michigan, but I can make sure that someone follows up to make sure that we are touching all of the right bases, including leading elected officials. But it's very much a focus, as again evidenced by these working groups that we've established with leading progressive voices, to make sure that we're reflecting all of their views as we formulate policy. When it comes to the question of India, look, let me say two things. First, I would invite you, if you have spare time or maybe trouble sleeping, to take a look at a piece that the Vice President wrote in Foreign Affairs, the leading journal for foreign policy, back in, I guess, January, February, that lays out in some detail his views on foreign policy and his views about the U.S. role and place in the world. And I think when you read that, you will see that at the very heart of his concept of our foreign policy is democracy. Its strength at home, but also its strength around the world. And he would say, and has said and has written, that first, the strength of our democracy at home is vital to our ability to be a force for progress and to advance democracy and defend it around the world. And of course, our democracy at home right now is under constant attack by the President of the United States, who is going after our institutions, going after our values, going after our people on a daily basis, and even unleashing against peaceful protesters whose voices were trying to be heard for racial justice in this country, unleashing security forces on them for the sake of a photo op. And of course, that's only one of many, many, many examples. So he starts with the notion that we have to strengthen our democracy at home. He lays out in some detail in foreign affairs, of all places, that at the heart of his foreign policy, it starts with strengthening our democratic institutions and values here at home. But then he talks about how our greatest strength around the world is the community of other democracies. And that too has been under siege. And we've seen a bit of a democratic recession. Of the 40 or so countries that have consistently been ranked fully free by Freedom House, a leading organization from the 1980s through the 90s through the early 2000s, half have been backsliding on the various metrics that measure a democracy. And of course, we've been backsliding too under President Trump. And at the very time when democracies around the world are kind of looking for the United States to assert its traditional role, imperfect as it's been, as the leader of the free world, President Trump, in embracing autocrats and dissing Democrats, seems to have suited up for the other side. That would change on day one of a Biden administration. It's a long way of saying that he puts democracy at the heart of our foreign policy. And he will be looking to work with our fellow democracies, but also to make sure that they are fulfilling their own obligations, their own responsibilities when it comes to strong democracies in their countries. We've seen, obviously, in Kashmir, when it comes to India, a huge challenge, and frankly, and clearly, the Indian government has not taken all of the necessary steps that it should and must to restore rights for all the people of Kashmir. Restrictions on dissent, things like preventing peaceful protests, which are particularly resonant right now, or shutting or slowing down the internet. These things weaken democracy, they don't strengthen it. And the Vice President's been disappointed by measures that the government of India has taken with regard to things like implementation and then the aftermath of the National Register of Citizens in Assam, the passage of the Citizenship Amendment Act, passing that into law. These are inconsistent with India's long tradition of secularism and sustaining a multi-ethnic and multi-religious democracy. And I think you would hear, as president, Joe Biden's voice speaking out on that, as we actually have in the context of the campaign. Finally, immigration. This is one of the things that I think goes to the heart of our campaign. I think you all know, just looking at our own border, President Trump isn't interested in solving the challenges at the border. He wants a border crisis to gin up his base, a wall from sea to shining sea, which is one of the dumbest things we could do. Ripping children from their mothers and then putting them in cages. And then, of course, what we've already talked about, a fundamentally un-American initiative, the so-called Muslim ban. So we've talked about this a lot in the campaign, and here's what Biden would do as president. He would immediately reverse virtually everything that President Trump has done. He would end the cruel asylum policies that were actually made worse, as you probably noticed this week, as well as family separations on day one. He would recognize the dreamers as the Americans they are. We do things like invest in smarter border technology, streamlined asylum, more immigration judges when it comes to our border. And then he would commit real political capital to finally passing legislative immigration reform and getting a roadmap to citizenship for the 11 or 12 million or so folks who are undocumented and who are doing every single day so much to make our country strong, especially in the COVID-19 crisis. He wants to keep family unification and diversity as cornerstones of our immigration system. And he would try to grow our economy by actually boosting opportunities for legal immigration. Mostly, we want to make sure that we keep the U.S. open and welcoming to people from every part of the world who contribute to the country. Just a word on refugees. You've seen that President Trump has taken a sledgehammer to what has traditionally been a source of tremendous strength and tremendous pride for this country, which is the refugee admission program. The Trump administration lowered the cap on refugees to 18,000. And of course, it doesn't get anywhere near even meeting that abysmally low cap. Joe Biden is committed to immediately raising the refugee cap to 125,000 from the 18,000 that it is at now with Trump, and using that as a platform, hopefully, to go even higher. So, all of these things are very much in the mix. And my conviction is you would see a vastly different approach to immigration under Joe Biden.
Thank you for all of that, Tony. And I know we've gone a little bit over. We're going to conclude with one last question, but it will not be from me. Our chairman, Khurram Wahid, does have one more for you that's high on a lot of folks' mind, while they also obviously care about a lot of different issues that we just covered, domestic and foreign. Our community is very diverse. So Khurram, go ahead.
Thank you. And first, I want to thank everyone, and thank you, Tony, for your time.
Thanks,
I think that it's understood where Vice President Biden is generally on Israel-Palestine. He did answer that in the Emgage questionnaire. He's looking at a two-state solution. a bigger question, I think, on the minds of many Muslim Americans right now, though, and definitely our younger generation, is that of the legislation at the state level and efforts at the federal level to combat the BDS movement, and how this is conflicting with our First Amendment rights, the ability of those who don't support the dehumanization of Palestinians by Israeli soldiers and the Israeli government's tactics of trying to denationalize Palestinians and Arabs. And they're seeing here that our country seems to be following suit and saying that while, yes, you can boycott if you're part of a union, we believe in the First Amendment, we were all for Sun City back in the day, but on Israel, no, you can't do it. And there seems to be a real principled issue here that's in conflict. Senator Rubio pushed forth the Combating BDS Act of 2019, and it passed in the Senate. So this is a real concern, and there's a question by many as to where a Vice President Biden sits on this issue.
Karim, thank you for the question, but thanks mostly for your leadership every single day, which is greatly appreciated, and it's always it's good to be with you. Let me just step back before answering the question specifically, because I think it is important to make clear and to restate Joe Biden's belief and conviction that Palestinians have the right to live in dignity and freedom in a state of their own. And I can tell you that as president, he would actively engage Israelis and Palestinians alike to try to find ways back to moving forward on a two-state solution so that everyone can live in some semblance of peace and freedom and security and prosperity in that context. He is committed to that, and as distant an objective as it seems, and to some even an objective that may be impossible, he remains convinced that that is the best and in some ways the only way forward. President Trump, in his unilateralism, in his moves to cut assistance to Palestinians, in his equivocation at best on the importance of two states, has made what was an already very hard road even harder. And ultimately, we would like to find a way back, starting by hopefully creating an environment in which that is more possible than it is now, for Israelis and Palestinians to negotiate the critical issues that they need to in order to arrive at two states for two peoples. Biden has long opposed unilateral steps by either side that would undermine that prospect, which is why he has spoken out against the prospect of annexation. And he said he opposes it now, and he would oppose it as president. And then I think we feel very strongly the need to address the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And again, as he said very clearly, to reverse the destructive cutoff in diplomatic ties to the Palestinian Authority, the cancellation of assistance programs that support Israeli-Palestinian security cooperation, economic development, humanitarian aid for the Palestinian people in the West Bank as well as Gaza. All of that is something that he has addressed. And again, he's opposed Israeli settlement expansion, and he would reopen the consulate in East Jerusalem and work to reopen the PLO office in Washington. And of course, he has significant expectations of the Palestinian leadership as well when it comes to forcefully and sustainably speaking out against violence, incitement, etc. Look, on BDS, I'm not going to pull any punches. Joe Biden is opposed to the BDS movement. He believes, and we'll just have to disagree on this, that it unfairly singles out Israel in a way that's inconsistent with the treatment of other countries. And in our judgment, in his judgment, it too often veers into anti-Semitism and an effort to delegitimize Israel. Again, I know we will disagree on that, but that's his view, and I feel I need to make sure it's honestly reflected. However, he does not support efforts by any democracy to criminalize free speech and expression. And by the way, that's one of the reasons he spoke out against Israel's decision to deny entry to American lawmakers, because they spoke out in favor of boycotting Israel. So I think when it comes to basic values and principles, even if we disagree on some of the specifics like the BDS movement, you know where Joe Biden stands and where he will stand as president of the United States.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone. Farouk, I don't know if you have a few words you would like to say, or you would want us to conclude here. I think we've gone over by 18 minutes. Just tell me yay or nay if you have anything you wanted to add. I'm going to take that as a no. So, Tony, thank you so much for fielding all of these questions candidly, as openly as possible. I want to thank the close to 40 attendees who were with us at the height of the conversation for your questions, for your thoughtful contributions to this discussion. This is an ongoing process with the Biden campaign and with Tony and with other advisors. We are looking to convene a number of future events focusing on domestic issues and additional foreign policy issues. So this is by no means not the only shot we have here. I welcome anyone to join us as we move forward. We are going to be putting together a public statement of support for Biden by different organizations and groups, and we are asking our elected officials to consider to come together on their own, those who want to and are supporting the vice president for president, to come together in a public format of their choosing, and we're happy to facilitate that as well. We think the moment is ripe for that right now. And with that, I'm going to conclude this event. Thank you all for being with us, and assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Thanks, Will. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Appreciate your time.